unido mucho y han sido internacionalistas.
The equipment was also brought to the ports by rail.
Este tipo de lucha frente a este tipo de
The commanding general of the troops in Angola gives an orientation and welcoming speech.
junto con la serenidad y la sabiduría ha dado buenos resultados.
The general reconfirms the voluntary nature of the operation and asks if each of the soldiers is a volunteer.
Bájenla. No hay nadie.
An advance contingent of troops is sent over by airplane. These are people from the Cuban Special Forces. The bulk of the troops and their equipment are sent by ship to Angola. The units of the Special Forces will be sent to the action area where the situation is most critical, at Cuito, Cuanavale itself. This is the area that the South Africans are attacking, and it is about 1,000 kilometers from the airport in Luanda. Next is the South African attack. These are the South African airplanes. And these are the Cubans defending Cuito, Cuanavale. These Cuban MiG airplanes, in the hands of the Cuban pilots, turned out to be decisively superior to those of the South Africans. The only airport in Angola was at Luanda. There were 3 ports, however, to receive the ships. The last 2 were in the southern part of the country, still about 1,000 kilometers from the war zone itself. Transporting the men and materiel to this area was a Herculean task. The trek to the war zone begins.
So now there's 52,000, Cuban troops in Angola. That's what he said. And Fidel Castro actually said that because they sent these 12,000 troops, it called the defenses of their own country into question. They had their defenses weren't as good because they sent these 12,000 troops.
It wasn't just the fact that the roads in this underdeveloped country were very primitive and very few. There were also losses and delays caused by mined roads, those mines which were laid by Savimbi's forces. And also a lot of bridges had been blown up by the guerrillas and by the South Africans. And added to all this was the fact that this was occurring during the spring floods, and so a lot of bridges were washed out, as well as those which were demolished and blown up by the guerrilla forces. Nonetheless, the Cubans did an amazing job of fording all of these areas, bypassing some areas, and where this was impossible, their engineers actually repaired and rebuilt the bridges themselves. Another monumental task of engineering and construction was building an airstrip which was close enough to the battle zone for close support tactical operations for the troops.
Ahora, ustedes serán testigos de otra gran obra constructiva, hoy totalmente concluida. Se trata de una pista para la aviación de...
The construction was made well enough so that it could be used well into the future, not just for the immediate needs of the battle zone itself. By working around the clock, the Cubans completed the airstrip in only 6 weeks. The Cubans claimed that the South Africans were caught off guard and surprised by the short time it took for them to build the airstrip. The Cuban air power had a devastating effect on the South Africans.
¿Qué dieta tiene un soldado? Bueno, allí se come bastante. Sí, ¿qué se come?
Meanwhile, back in Havana, Fidel Castro was examining every detail of what was going on. In this scene, he's talking to his supply officer, asking him where he's getting the food. They're buying Angolan tuna, and also wondering about why there are so many colds among the soldiers, suggesting that they should be sending more vitamin C to the troops. Castro also questioned very closely this tank commander who just came back from the battles. He suggests some changes in tactics. Meanwhile, some of the soldiers who have arrived at the war zone start preparing defensive positions.
Canta conmigo, varón, y si el enemigo llega, vamos a darle colega, como matero y cañón, porque aquí ya no hay cabrón que rompa lo que está hecho. Angola y Cuba derecho van por senderos hermanos, construyendo con las manos lo que está dentro del pecho, construyendo con las manos lo que está dentro del pecho. Esto es pa' hombre, mi hermano, de Cabinda hasta Cunene, y un infierno pa' que tiene sociedad con el tirano.
The troops received not only military briefing and information, but also a political indoctrination as to why they're there and what they're supposed to be doing. Meanwhile, the soldiers wait, prepare their positions with the help of some automated equipment which builds the trenches for them. They prepare their machinery and get ready for battle. The woman who is the head of the medical unit at the front says it's not only important to have medical facilities available, but also it's good for morale to have women there. These are the facilities which the Cubans have for medical assistance and treatment near the front. I guess equivalent to our MASH units in the Korean War. And here is what the patients would find in the city. Before going into battle, the Angola troops entertained the Cuban troops. From the end of January throughout February, the South Africans attacked, trying to break the lines of the Angolans, the Fapla troops, which were east of Cuito Cuanavale. The heavy attacks by the South Africans caused severe losses to the Angola troops. which at one time in one significant sector only had 8 tanks left to face the South Africans. But the Angolans held, particularly with the help of the fresh Cuban troops. This was vitally important because the main thrust of the Cuban attack was going to be to the west and to the south of the city, to meet the South Africans at the Namibian border rather than passively receive the South African attacks and then counterattack. A lot of heavy fighting from the end of January throughout February, with South Africa attacking several times and the Cubans gradually pushing them toward the south. The Cubans particularly had the advantage in detective equipment such as radar, sound detection, and also in control of the air, with the Cuban planes vastly outperforming those of the South Africans and driving them from the sky.
Por estos días de febrero, los racistas habían cambiado la táctica.
As a result of this, the South Africans changed their tactics. They could not make any day attacks anymore because they had no air superiority or a chance of surprise. So they started launching a series of night attacks. The South Africans still figured they had technological superiority, and so they attacked repeatedly in February. In one such attack, the South Africans began at 4 in the morning, attacking the FAPLA troops on the flank of the Cubans, trying to turn the flank and driving a wedge between them. But the attack was beaten off throughout this battle, which lasted more than 12 hours.
Los combates de ese día se prolongaron por más de 12 horas.